This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the third week of December 2014. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. Long time no speak. We haven't done one of these in approximately a month, and that means there is a whole lot to talk about on this final episode of The Beat for this year. Don't worry, not the final episode of all time, just for 2014. We got a lot to discuss, and we're probably going to go a little longer than usual, so your prayers have been answered. All right, let's get into it. That is Luke Thomas of the SiriusXM Fight Club and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com, and the man who is celebrating his 21st birthday today, the one and only,
good one.
The man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall. You can thank your lovely wife for that reminder.
Ah, well, good.
How about that?
21.
21 or 22?
What's in this cup?
Yeah, exactly. Sharing a birthday with Brad Pitt and Stone Cold Steve Austin. How about that?
Yeah. And Keith Richards, if you really want to know.
Yes. Well, happy birthday.
Thanks.
I bet you would not want to spend your birthday anywhere else but right here doing
right
the
here.
show.
You look more like Keith than Brad.
I live more like Keith than Brad. So.
All right, guys, let's get into it. Like I said, so much to discuss. Let's talk about the big news of this week. That, of course, happened on Tuesday. One current UFC fighter, Kung Lee, two former UFC fighters, Nathan Quarry and John Fitch, they announced that they had filed a class action antitrust lawsuit against the UFC. It took place in a San Jose, California court. They had this press conference. The documents are out there. For the most part, I'd imagine a lot of people know what's at stake here, what's going on. We don't need to go through all of that. But I want to know, just 2 days later, and I know it's a lot to digest, and we must say as well, we are not practicing attorneys, so we're not people.
I'm practicing, just not licensed.
Exactly. What do you make of this? Are there any legs to stand on here?
It's crazy that they can't cut Kung Lee because then he just go to Bellator and use this news to make himself even more high profile. So they're sort of stuck with him as the fact of what he is. It's crazy. I don't know that it will define 2015. I know we'll talk about that because these things are so glacial and how they move, and you just don't know. But you sort of take a look back and listen. Again, we just don't know. Is it going to get thrown out? Is it not going to get thrown out? But let's posit this. Most attorneys that I've talked to and experts that I've consulted say it's unlikely to get thrown out. How much further it goes than that, we don't really know. But if you accept the idea that it's not going to get thrown out, this has to be the most substantive challenge to labor relations they've literally ever faced in the history of the organization. That is a fact. Again, with that one caveat. It is the groups they've got. This guy Eric Kramer from the firm in D.C. is we're talking the heaviest of hitters in antitrust litigation. They took their time in building a case. Again, who knows if they'll win, whatever the case, but it just feels like, we talked about this before the show, I don't know that I feel winds of change, to your point in your story about fighters speaking up, but with less Dana White speaking, which I think is directly related to the lawsuit, and had nothing to do with media misrepresenting him, there's a vacuum created, and you're starting to see pockets of discontent reveal themselves. Where that's going to go, I don't know, but this has the potential to be the big story in the history of the sport, at least for the next 5 to 10 years.
We must give credit to your outlet, SI.com. Tremendous story about how this all breaks down from the perspective of the plaintiffs as well as the UFC. So I do suggest anyone who's out there and interested in the story and checking that out. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, I had a little help putting that story together, which is to say that Michael McCann wrote all of it, and they looked and they showed it to me. That was basically it. I got a little credit line at the bottom for looking it over. But yeah, he did a great job laying it out. And what I took out of it was that the next phase is where the UFC has an opportunity to try to get this thrown out. If that happens, well, let's move on to the next topic. But if it doesn't happen, the phase that happens after that is discovery, which is where a lot of potentially sensitive documents within the UFC...
Unless they settle, which they can settle at any point.
Right. But if those documents, which is all the things that we never know anything about, we always say, well, we think this fighters are making this amount, or the contract says this or that. But a lot of things happen in the UFC secretively, and that is within their right, as far as we know. This case is challenging that. But once that happens, if the case moves on and we go to discovery, then we might, if barring a settlement, we might learn some things that we don't know. We don't know today, but in terms of antitrust and monopoly and all those things, for us to comment about that, it'd be sort of like taking those lawyers who had the press conference the other day and bringing them down to Brazil, putting them cage side, and having them write an 800-word story analyzing the Machida-Dalloway fight on Saturday night. They would be lost just as much as we are lost talking about legal issues, because these are, monopoly. We sort of think we know what a monopoly is, but we don't really know the ins and outs, all the little stipulations that need to be met in order to reach that plateau. So I think we are a little bit, our hands are a bit tied in commenting specifically. But in general, as Luke said, I think this is potentially a game changer.
Or those lawyers would do great pieces and we'd realize that anybody can do our job. And that would be even more disappointing.
Yeah, we're talking about a low bar they have to exceed.
I was trying.
I think they've got a little, but you know what? It's funny with this sport, with it going into 5th over this last year, a couple of years, getting the getting the big TV deal, sort of going into 5th, putting it Fight Pass, globalization, all the things they're doing. With all that stuff, all that mainstream sort of movement, comes greater scrutiny. So when things like this happen, it actually, SI suddenly, a guy from SI does a great piece on it because the bigger outlets, ESPNs, and all those are finally going to pay attention to it. This is probably not the kind of thing that the UFC wants people to pay attention to as it moves into those spaces. So to me, it's sort of the process, regardless of what happens with it, where it all goes. Right now, there's some scrutiny on them, and it's interesting because I do feel like there's a little bit of a platform at this moment because there's sort of this built-up tension through all of 2014 among fighters, fans, media, etc. Toward the UFC, towards MMA, but mostly towards the UFC. I feel like there's just a little bit of, people are just waiting for that thing to sort of latch onto. It'd be interesting to see how many of those people then try to jump aboard this, fighters particularly who want to get involved. We've already seen guys like, I know Sean Shirk right away had said something, Ryan Gemmo, guys like that. Who knows how this will go, but it's the process right now. When it starts to happen, it'd be interesting to see kind of what sort of light the UFC plays out in for the greater, the greater people out there, like the bigger audience.
To jump off of your point, I can't remember the last time that I got an email from one of the top guys on the masthead at SI about MMA. I deal with my direct editor about covering this fight or that fight or even some of the other issues that come up in the sport. But this was something that that myself and other people got a memo or an email saying, "Are we on this?" This was a big story, and we, as a group, decided that we should have the legal analyst, the guy who covers sports law for Sports Illustrated, cover the story, with little assistance from me. But that's what the kind of thing that, as Chuck says, the spotlight is on this story in a way that MMA in general and UFC specifically isn't used to.
One UFC insider, if you want to call him that, was talking to me about this, and he said he felt like this was, the press conference on Tuesday was their way of trying to rally the troops, trying to get people to jump on board. And I was like, this is a time, as you guys were saying, where there's a lot of growing resentment towards the UFC, and you have some pretty big figures in the sport who are on the outs with the UFC. Two that come to mind: Randy Couture, Wanderlei Silva. Let's throw in Frank Shamrock in that mix. They're a bunch. Surprised that none of these guys are involved in any of this?
I don't know, Frank. I don't know if he wants to be involved and get his name dragged through it. Wanderlei, I'm surprised not, because there's two arguments to be made. One is that, look, let's say Wanderlei Silva, I don't know how much he made in his career at UFC. Let's just say 10 million. Could be much less, could be much more, but let's just say 10 million. Aggregately speaking, $10 million is a lot of money by really any kind of measurement. But the question is, was he worth 50? Was he worth 60 million, right? Proportionally, was he able to get a fair share of the revenue split versus 10 million? But I think even if you grant the argument that maybe he wasn't paid what he was supposed to be, $10 million, a guy who got paid that kind of money, having him in a lawsuit can be a bit of a liability, actually. You want to get the guys who have credentials, but maybe you can more easily demonstrate weren't able to reap the financial windfalls, right? So to me, Sean Shirk makes a hell of a case. This guy wore UFC gold and was featured in all kinds of shows. Remember the Rochelle Leah show? They showed all the training Sean Shirk did, and they commented on this and during broadcasts. And now he's we're doing carpentry in the Midwest, and that's an honest day's work. But that's not what you'd think someone who had that kind of credentials would be doing. So I think that's why they want to leave some of those names off. You want to get that guy in the sweet spot, all the credentials, but none of the money.
I was also trying to see, okay, what are the flags involved here? And two that came to mind were the FTC did investigate Zuffa just a couple of years ago after they purchased Strikeforce, and they essentially came away with nothing. And also, I thought it was interesting the way they painted Bellator. on the conference call where they refused to A, bring them up, and then when asked about them, they kind of just, moved on from the subject, and B, in the actual lawsuit, Bellator is very much painted as a minor league, and, we'll see this year, their ratings have been very good on Spike TV, in particular at the end of the year, and they are gearing up for a big campaign. They are saying they're going to be in the Brock Lesnar sweepstakes. They have given, an offer to Gilbert Melendez and Eddie Alvarez in the past. Bellator is not the Bellator that they were 2-3 years ago. Is this 2-3 years too late?
Well, I don't think that we can read too much into that. I mean, this is the lawyers have constructed a lawsuit based upon certain principles that we may or may not really fully understand. And, the status of Bellator might play a role. The evolving status of Bellator, let's say, might play a role in this, where it might not. I mean, again, I think it's kind of. I think I have some problem with us looking at this, examining this lawsuit too closely, and trying to come away with draw conclusions that are based upon logic in our minds, but that may not be following the letter of the law. I mean, as I told you guys before the show, I just finished being on jury duty for a week, and there were so many times during this situation where I would see things were happening in court that logically made sense to me, but there's a certain way in which a court proceeding occurs, and it really is not necessarily the search for truth. It's the battle between two opponents whose story is going to prevail. And in the end, the lawyers for both sides are going to have the opportunity to examine what, say, a monopoly is, or what an antitrust lawsuit really constitutes, and they're going to be the narrative between them is going to be what's going to prevail here, and how Bellator fits into that. I really think that it's hard for us to really to have that much say on that. To me, it's like, are you then arguing about the past, which is very much a part of this argument, or the present and the future? Because the present and the future are very much different today than the past, right? You can say that the UFC has done this and that to eliminate competition, that they've forced guys to do certain things, but today it feels like things are a bit different. So that's why I'm wondering, if you would have done this maybe 2 years ago when Strikeforce was bought, Bellator wasn't where they were, you can paint a different picture. Sure, but damages are still damages. If those damages occurred at that time, they still could be dealt with.
But the case starts at 2010. Just it doesn't go all the way back to when they purchased, Zuffa purchased UFC from SEG.
Right.
So there's a defined universe of damage.
Prior to 2010, they bought WFA, WEC, Pride, and they're looking for treble damages, so 3 times the amount. I was wondering, would the better approach have been, because those guys are involved and they're looking for damages, right? They're looking to be compensated. And I was wondering, and they made it clear, they're not looking to unionize. This is not about a union, even though Rob Macy of MMA FA, that's been something he's been kind of, banging the drum about. Would that have been the route to go for first? Because now you're saying, okay, I'm trying to look out for the better interest of all the fighters, today and tomorrow. But if you're just looking to, reap the rewards or the damages of what you may have lost in the past, well, not everyone right now is going to benefit from that, right? I mean, the guys who are involved are going to benefit, but how is Brian Jimmo going to benefit if he's not a part of this class action lawsuit?
Well, I mean, that's another legal thing where they get the right to represent people who fit a certain description. Remember, the only people who, if they get their way all the way, the only people who are exempt are people who have strictly competed overseas, not including Canada. Like, if you've just fought in Germany or if you've just fought in Singapore. If you're Royston Wee, you're short. Okay, fine. But
that's BS for Royston.
Yeah, poor Royston's getting the shaft. To me, like, this is blind leading the blind here a little bit, but I'm just going to tell you, I spoke to a couple people one who has done a little bit of antitrust work, and some of the lawyer friends of mine who looked over the brief and had a general perception about what they felt confident on commenting on, and they kind of felt like the monopoly case by the fighters was kind of weak. This is the truth. Like, if you look at the UFC just is better than the competitors. You go to their weigh-ins. How awesome is a UFC weigh-in? You won't find a better weigh-in in all of combat sports. They are efficient. Their production value at the shows is better. The fighters are better. The social media presence is better. They're a better company. And the FTC and other places, they're not going to want to step in and damage such a vibrant, strong, aggressive organization in that space. Now, if there's malfeasance, they will, but they don't want to take that part away from Zuffa. We can all agree it's a better product. But what they did say that they might have something to stand on was the contracts. Now, the contracts is related to the monopolization. But I think the key point from all of this was that the lawyers all told me, They may have put this monopoly stuff in there knowing they can't win, but the more they can get up front, the more they can concede in the event of a settlement. And so that might be why they have even an argument that they know to be weak, because it's, you know, oh, I'm renegotiating my contract. I want $1 million. Okay, you can get 100,000. Okay, deal. Because all I really wanted was 75. You know?
Right. I think you bring up a great point about the discovery portion, and that could be the most fascinating part of all this. And maybe the UFC doesn't want us to get to that point, and that's where they settle.
Well, they definitely wouldn't. I mean, I don't know whether they'll settle or not, or whether the case will be thrown out. But there's no doubt they don't want that to happen, because all that information hasn't been out already.
Sure.
But if they wanted it out there, it would be readily available. But it's not. So that's where So it's almost like some of the things that we might learn may have only a peripheral connection to the case. It may just be that we start to learn some things about UFC contracts and procedures that relate to the case, but in and of themselves are interesting and teach us some things about the way things operate. And I think that the point about unionization. I mean, yeah, this is not directly connected to that, but in a way it kind of is, because if we start to learn some of the ways in which, like I thought it was, I hate to bring up what other people comment, but I thought that, your colleague Kenny Florian on USA Tonight, who I think is generally really great, he said something when they were commenting about about this case. He said, "We're all in this together." I mean, I know that I'm taking words out of context, but we're not. It's like there couldn't be farther from the truth. Every fighter, it's every man and woman for him or herself in the UFC, and that's not the way it is in the NBA or in the NFL or in Major League Baseball. There's no organization for the way fighters negotiate anything, whether it be how much we're going to be paid for a fight.
Isn't that problematic?
That's what I'm saying. That might be so. So it's the opposite of we're all in this together.
Sure.
And so whether the push for some kind of organization, whether they call it a union or player association, whatever they call it, maybe that will grow out of this. So far, none of that has ever worked at the UFC, and certainly hasn't worked with any of the Fertitta casinos either, coincidentally. So we'll see.
Chuck, I know that you're somewhat of a sports historian. You know the Curt Flood case? He challenged Major League Baseball's reserve clause. He didn't actually win. He sued MLB, but he didn't win. But it led to changes along the way, and that's what started free agency. Perhaps, more to your point, this can lead to something down the road. Like, just this coming out there, do you feel like it's a positive for the fighters, or it's yet to be determined?
It's yet to be determined. I mean, ultimately, when you look at things like, we always talk about this, the unions, what can be done, why isn't there a union? It's very tough. I mean, obviously, we're dealing with a roster full of independent contractors, and that makes it, obviously, I don't think you can do a union, right? Like, it'd have to be an association at that point. But it still gives them a collective voice. It still gives them say in what's going on. It still puts them, bands them together. But when you really look at how's it going to come about? You're constantly reminded it's not a team sport. A guy at the top is not a guy at the bottom. Sure. The fluctuation of all the movement and everything, people coming and going, it's very tough to do. And it's not like a league that's North American based. It's not like something where you have a specific city of a collective in a specific city or a state or a country. It's global. You'd have to. So who's going to spearhead that movement to get everybody on board of that, to build something like that? That's always the problem. It's such a process to bring that many people together, and especially when you have certain people, 70 millionaires, the UFC has made, or whatever, the people at the very top of the game. It's just why do it? You know what I mean? So to me, it's like. It's nice to talk about why isn't there a union, why isn't there an association, why don't these things? But to me, it seems like unless somebody spearheads it specifically, and that's what they do, and that's their mission. It just doesn't seem like it's feasible to me.
And clearly, there are different. Different fighters have different things at stake. I mean, the guy who is on the first fight of the night versus, say, the top line in the sport, like John Jones. They have very different interests in how they want things to move forward in their relationship with the UFC. But I found it kind of interesting that the comments from John Jones about the way that the fight with Cormier is being promoted. And I think John probably learned after that fiasco where he wouldn't fight Chael Sonnen and he got vilified by Dana White. I think he learned that we're not all in all this together. I'm here to fight for myself and for my family. And I think he got another lesson in here, and that he he doesn't come across very well. And I think he said in his comments something along the lines of, well, I was a little offended by the way this fight was being promoted. Obviously he said it. He said the things that every single word that they use in their promo, he said. He has to own up to it. But here's his company, the people who are looking out for him, allegedly, were using things that really don't put him in a very good light. And I think that as some of the fighters become more aware of this, that they are truly independent contractors, that they truly are not company men, maybe some things will change a little bit. But because people's interests are so different, it's going to be really hard to unify them, I think.
I have a couple of responses. One, part of the reason why there's such a push for a union or a trade association to help these guys is because we don't live in a space where some of these contractual requests that this lawsuit is making have happened yet. In other words, if they had the ability to retain their likeness rights, if they had information about what guys were making, like full audit rights about the company, maybe there wouldn't need to be an association because you'd have enough leveraging points where that would be a gratuitous change. So that's one thing I would say. Two, even when Curt Flood was suing Major League Baseball, there were plenty of people at the time who were very pro-management about him. It took a long time for even the players to think that these kinds of labor improvements were in their interest. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're at a stage now where the fighters they're not convinced that they need the help because they haven't seen any tangible benefit from it. Although I think that would change in an instant. I think it's a failure of imagination not to think that they could be awakened, they could take the red pill. And lastly, I would say, though, again, I don't know, I wouldn't say that there are sweeping winds of change, but there is so much discourse in the media between media members, or I should say among media members ourselves, and mostly among fighters, that is just so political. There's just so much dishonesty, and there's so much, not like malfeasance exactly, but people, Uriah Faber being interviewed about the Reebok deal. I mean, could you not read between the lines and see how upset he was? But you can't say these things because we live in a space where there's potentially reprisal or other unforeseen costs. If this lawsuit has no other benefit than to at least give fighters a space to air their grievances, legitimate or otherwise, that is a win for everybody. It makes things healthier. It does force the UFC to realize, or at least take notice of the fact that some of these guys have maybe some gripes that they should do something about, even if they don't want to. I see that kind of transparency as ultimately a good thing for everybody involved.
So you bring up the Reebok deal, and the timing is very interesting in all this. Now, I know they've been working on it for quite some time, but the Reebok deal was just announced. Do you feel as though by the time this thing is actually put into practice, July of next year is when they say it's going to, come into play, that there's going to be a lot of pushback because you're starting to see little things like Demetrius Johnson talking to MMA Junkie. He has a fantastic deal with Microsoft, and it appears as though he won't be able to wear them inside the cage. That was a great deal for him, and there are others as well. Do you feel like, okay, this thing came out, but that's the thing where if you have collective bargaining, if you have an association representing you, they're like, all right, wait a second. How much are we making here? What's the deal? What are the terms? How much will we lose out if we have to get rid of these sponsorships? That's why you have associations to collectively bargain those deals. Do you feel like between now and July, this thing is not going to, it's not going to get to the finish line without a couple bumps in the road?
Yeah, so some of the managers were complaining that they should have just done this deal immediately because Brendan Schaub too. Oh, I lost 6 sponsors overnight because they know there's no future for them in that particular capacity anyway. I don't know what's going to happen between now and then, but I wonder this. If you do the math about what's been reported, 70 million, you break it down over 6 years, about 11 plus, and then about 260,000 a card. Now, it depends on who's the card and how it gets distributed, but on average, that works out to about $10,000 a fighter per fight. We know that the payment structure is very different than that, but I'm just saying. But there are already fighters doing the math being like, well, I know I might be getting lost here, especially if I'm unranked. Guys like Joe Lazan, for example. Not putting words in his mouth, but I'm saying he fits that profile. I wonder if that would then, if the suit doesn't get thrown out, then lead to enthusiasm to join the suit. Because if you're taking away, again, if you're taking away money at a pivotal point when other fighters are raising discontent issues, the two may wind up dovetailing together. But short of what we know, or I should say, short of getting concrete information about the returns on the deal, I hesitate to speculate too much.
I've always felt that if the fighters are, truly unhappy with their deal, the only way that things are going to change is if John Jones and Daniel Cormier come together and say, you know what, we're not fighting on January 3rd. And then, by the way, Conor McGregor and Dennis Siver and Ronda Rousey, if guys just say we're not fighting, then something would have to be done. I'm not sure if going this route will ultimately lead to change. I've always felt that if they actually banded together and stood up for each other, things would change. I don't see that
is
happening.
why it won't happen.
Yeah, I don't see that happening.
I disagree a little bit. I don't think that Ronda Rousey has to do anything. And I don't think she ever will.
I'm saying if they are unhappy, that's the only time.
Yeah, but they don't have to. They don't have to strike. I mean, the train is always leaving the station at the 45 shows, better or worse, 45 shows. I'm not recommending this, by the way.
Sure.
I'm not giving you a blueprint fighters to go and stick it to the man. I'm not saying that, but I am saying just having elite fighters on the card would never work. If the guys who are making 8 and 8 all decided they didn't want to, if all the guys on the prelim card, you're not going to show up to Sweden with 5 fights. It's not going to happen. So this idea that like you have to get the Andersons and the GSPs, no, you don't. You have to get just enough guys to disrupt the product.
You don't think those are replaceable?
With who?
Those 8 and 8 guys are replaceable.
We're talking en masse, though. I mean, you can probably pickpocket certain promoters here and there, but if it becomes enough of an issue, also you're going to have bad press as a consequence. These things have real value and real, I shouldn't say value, real impact in the real world.
Jeff,
but the bigger fighters, I was just going to say, the bigger name fighters can have a bigger impact just by there being 1 or 2 of them, like the case you gave. I mean, as much as I know those are not situations that actually would occur, if one fight like that happened, one main event fight, the fighters just said no go. I mean, that would you'd have to get a lot of those 8 and 8 guys.
I'm just saying it's possible.
Yeah,
and those are the guys that will not back out of fight because they need the money because they're just trying to make the leap.
A lot of money, right? Let's talk about some other news, guys. Yesterday, I reported on UFC Tonight that Rory McDonald has been informed that he will not be getting the title shot next. Now, if you recall, after beating Tarek Saffiedine in Halifax, the UFC made a big splash about this. Dana White was doing interviews. He was talking to the Canadian press. He said, Rory McDonald is getting a title shot. Not only that, it's happening in Canada. Let's not forget that Canada has been kind of ignored this past year. It's a topic that's near and dear.
This past century.
Well, yeah, no, but, oh, wow.
By Americans, anyway.
That is a low blow. I'm talking from the UFC. They canceled their last 2 big shows there, Toronto and Montreal. So Rory has been informed this. Now, the UFC hasn't come out and confirmed this. They haven't said what they're going to do, but all roads, lead to Johnny Hendricks. He even tweeted out a smiley face last night with a link to the story. Is this the right call?
Fans were bitter.
Yeah.
They were bitter last night.
The backlash was pretty big last night.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not opposed to it. Dave Meltzer had I feel bad for Rory, but all these things you can do. Oh, Matt Brown, Robbie Lawler winner. That wound up being that it happened that way. But number one contender. Man, it's not number one contender until it is pen to ink, and it is nothing more. That pay-per-view, the last one, the Hendricks Lawler rematch, Meltzer reported up to potentially 400,000 pay-per-view buys. That's pretty good for the past year. It's not what it was, obviously, 2009 era, but that's good.
That's great.
That's real numbers. I'm not saying they don't need to take care of the Canadian market. I am not saying that they don't need to do things to invest in that side of the business. I understand why fans would be upset meritoriously. That's the one you want to. That's the next pivot point. I can feel that. But hey, man, in a down year and with all those injuries, why not? Those 2 guys have 10 rounds together between Hendricks and Lawler. All 10 were pretty great, if not incredible. You don't know what the next 5 might look like. They don't have that kind of narrative between. I mean, yeah, Rory and Robbie fought before, but it's a good fight at the same level of intensity. So I don't think that they could have made a mistake going that way, but I am not going to beat them up for going the other way, given all the other larger business considerations.
What do you think?
I think Rory should have gotten the fight, and he still might. I mean, we've seen these things. We've seen the winds of change, in a moment. I've beaten up the UFC on title fight matchmaking before. I'm not going to do it here. I don't think that giving Johnny Hendricks this rematch is a horrible thing. This is not anything even close to the worst title fight that they've come up with. But I do think that they should set some sort of standards for when a champion loses a fight, whether there's going to be a rematch. And I think that should have more to do with how long that champion has reigned, or certain circumstances that may say, well, we really need a rematch of this. Johnny Hendricks had not defended his championship once. I don't know that he necessarily warrants successfully. I don't know that we have that he's necessarily earned this. I think if T.J. Dillashaw loses his first title, it would be his second defense, wouldn't it be? But if he loses to the first main guy, other than a late replacement, I'm not sure that I would necessarily give him a rematch. I mean, I think there are certain guys who do deserve, without a doubt, a rematch. If John Jones loses next month, absolutely he should have a rematch. There are certain, Chris Weidman, he's earned it. But I just don't think that Hendricks, crosses that line for me. But it's not a horrible fight to do again. I just think McDonald deserves it.
The thing with me is this Johnny Hendricks sort of reign. He's been there from March on, and it's been very strange because I feel like he's not one of those dynamic champions to begin with. He's not a guy that people are 100% behind. For some reason, it's not a shtick. It's just who he is. It's just, people are just sort of like not that into him. It's a strange thing. And I think the way that he sort of fought this last fight, he was trying to. I think he really was trying for the points more than he was trying to finish the fight. He was trying to win on the scorecards. There was some boos. I didn't expect that in a million years in the arena that night. Just from his side of it alone. Robbie Lawler, on the other hand, I feel like is the guy that we're like, hey, Robbie Lawler, this guy, what a great story, resurrection, all this stuff, fighter of the year, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like he's placed fine. I just feel like that the big complaint is, hey, Rory McDonald was promised this, and we've been thinking about the possibility of this. And Johnny Hendricks, for some reason, just doesn't. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like he just doesn't. He has not captivated the imagination in terms of as a champion so far. I feel like that's part of it. There's some hate towards Johnny Hendricks, and I think partially because of the way he fought, but partially just his personality. He's not the most charismatic guy that way. But to me, the big issue to me is the Canada thing, because this was what they were teasing the whole time. Rory McDonald, I know he's not going to be the next GSP, but he was certainly a training partner of GSP's. He was a guy that GSP himself was sort of, hey, this is the next guy to come up, et cetera, et cetera. You finally have the platform. It all played out perfectly to have this rematch, and now you're going to say that we're going to push that back. Anything can happen in that time, and I sort of lean that direction. I think they should have went with McDonald, and who knows, they still may do that. Sometimes they change their mind a little bit when they hear that backlash come in.
But you reported that McDonald isn't getting the fight. You did not report that Hendricks is. Maybe got some other Canadian guy who's going to go.
Right. I was thinking about that afterwards. Could you imagine after Roy McDonald said I would never stab George in the back if they give it to George, who, by the way, they said right. If George ever comes back, he would get a title shot.
Right.
I have a hard time believing that. I don't think George would do that to Rory. I have a pretty big problem with this one, and it has nothing to do with Canadian or not. Same reason I had a problem with TJ Dillashaw having to fight Renan Barão again. When you come out there and say that a guy is getting a title shot next if he wins this fight, and you make a big deal about it, and you say it's going to be in a specific place, you can't just take it away from a guy. We'll talk about the CM Punk thing a little later on, but to me that is a worse sort of complaint about the sport than signing a professional wrestler. Giving title shots to people coming off losses, taking away title shots after you clearly earned it, is a big mistake. It's a big no-no in my opinion. And you want to talk about morale, this is a way to get people to get pretty pissed at you, fighters. The Showtime Pettis thing. UFC 125. That ended in a draw. He was promised a title shot, ended in a draw. I still felt like they should have probably given it to Pettis because he earned that right. He won the fight to get a title shot, but it was a draw, fine. Barão, Dillashaw, you want to say that the guy was undefeated for all those years? Fine, you could get away with it, even though I think it was a bad business move and he clearly wasn't ready to fight. But here's a guy who lost and came back and fought 3 killers this year. And then you went out and went to the media and promised him a title shot just because this rematch was close. Guess what? It's not the worst thing in the world for Johnny Hendricks to go out there and fight the winner of maybe Lombard Berkman, build his stock back up and say, all right, here I am, I'm back. That's not bad business. There's definitely a case to be made for going that route. And I just feel like it's kind of putting down a guy who went out there and did everything that you asked of him and is finally getting that title shot. He's never gotten that title shot before.
Look at Ariel getting all worked up, man.
It irks me, and I feel bad for the kid. I mean, the guy's, and he's taking it the right way. He said, you know what, I'm just going to go out there and wreck my next opponent like usual. But if you're going out there and promising a title shot and taking it away, I mean, what?
It's funny, man, because I was even at the Metamoris event a couple weeks back, and Rory McDonald competed in it, and they give him the microphone afterward. What's next for you? I'm going to fight for the title.
It's like I got a huge round of applause for it.
Yes, and I'm like, it's just that sort of thing. You're like, yeah, you just take it for granted. This is who's going to fight. Right. It's already built up. It's already building towards something.
Yeah, but is it 2-1 though? Like, is it partly like, okay, you're whoring a guy who has meritoriously built a resume, and you made claims? Is it that, and is it like, I feel like, in other words, if you had reported that, exactly what you reported last night or 2 nights ago, whatever it is. Oh, we're not.
It was last night.
Anymore. Yes. Sorry, I got old habits. Not hard. Sure. But then also reported, okay, but the UFC is bringing a title fight to Canada, to I don't know, Toronto, or even Winnipeg, or whatever, or Calgary, where they had had that disaster show. do you think there'd be as much outrage about it? It'd be like, well, all right, so Rory's got to wait a little bit, but listen, we're going to take care of Canada, bring in a title.
So you said Rory sit out until the fight?
In other words, if you had announced everything in a different weight class, let's say a lightweight title fight was going to come to Canada or something like that with Showtime Pettis, do you think the outrage would have been as much? Because you're still having all the problems you're articulating, but it would soften the blow.
Look, I haven't looked at where all the people who are complaining about this are from, but I feel like one has nothing to do with the other. I feel like people are saying, this guy went out there, fought the fight, won the fight, and then you said he's getting a title shot as a result. And look, I mean, he's really in the discussion for Fighter of the Year. If you look at what he's done, you know, he beat Maya, that was a very impressive performance. He beat Safadine, and he beat Tyron Woodley. I mean, those are three really good fighters.
And there's a storyline there because it was the Robbie Lawler fight that basically got his mind right. According to, I remember he was on your MMA Hour, and he basically spilled this whole thing about he sort of had lost interest, got a little listless, and it cost him. And he was like, he revived from that loss. So there is some storyline there too.
There's something to be said for, you know, kind of giving away a trilogy too quickly. Right. Kane and JDS. Now, Johnny didn't take the damage that JDS did. That was a mistake as well, in my opinion. Hindsight, of course, 2020. But let people get excited about these trilogies. Don't just give them away in the span of a year. You know what I mean?
So you've soothed me that it's not going to be GSP, but
I don't know.
That begs the question.
I would be shocked if GSP took that away.
Then, you know, can CM Punk even get down to 170 for this title fight?
Could you imagine?
Listen, I think your points are well stated, but I don't think that they're lost on UFC management. And so the question is, if they know all the things that you know, why would they do it? Now, I don't think it's unconcern for Rory. I really think we have to take a step back and say, okay, if we have, and I know this might undercut my argument about CM Punk, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, but there are certain concessions you do have to make in this kind of climate that you may ordinarily not be comfortable with. And everyone's going to have different limits about that. But maybe UFC management just said, this is one, at least for now, that we're comfortable with. Clarification, whoever, let's say it's Robbie and Hendricks 3. Does that mean Rory's next in line if he waits?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I asked him, what are you going to do? And he said, he hypothesized that, you know, maybe they'll give me Lombard because he's fighting in 2 weeks. He doesn't know. He hasn't been told.
See, that's unfortunate.
But here's the thing. Like, you want a guy in his prime to wait. Let's say they fight. Okay, look at the calendar, right? No one is going to fight before March at this point, and you have to think, I mean, even Robbie himself said he wants to fight around Memorial Day. If they grant him that wish, he fought 4 times this year. So then, let's just say it's around Memorial Day. When's the guy who won that fight going to be ready? You're going to have Rory McDonald sit out in the prime of his career after winning 3 in a row till November, October. So now he has to roll the dice, and how many times have we seen that happen? The guy rolls the dice, loses. Pettis happened to him against Clay Guida. So it just, I feel like it's putting him in a tough spot when you can go with the title shot, and then you have Hendricks fighting a big fight to get back to where he was. And look, he only has to win 1 fight to get back there, in my opinion, because he lost that fight. It was so close. I just have a big problem with telling a kid who worked so hard to get to this point, who has never gotten a title shot, who did everything that you asked, who stumbled once and went back and won 3 times, and then just taking it away from him.
Maybe McDonald needs
Welcome to the meritocracy team. Thank you very much.
Maybe McDonald needs to tell him he's Irish.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's talk about CM Punk then. We've been teasing it, and I want to work backwards here. I want to start with today. CM Punk is in New York. He's probably just a few blocks from us. He's doing all kinds of media. Boomer and Carton.
Oh wait, is this CM? Okay.
This is the entrance. Cue the cult of personality. So he's doing CBS Radio. He's doing SI. He's all over ESPN yesterday. He's doing a ton of media, and I've actually told this to him, you know, straight up. I've said, look, I feel like everyone's making a mistake by having you out there and do so much media. Last week he was on Fox Sports Live. In my opinion, he should have come out there, did that interview with Joe Rogan, did the media, the press conferences, and all that. Everything on Saturday night that he did I thought was fine, including talking to us, which was great. But then go away. 6 to 8 months, just go away. Do your thing. Don't talk to anyone. Because now you're being asked questions that you don't know the answers to. And CM Punk, if you know, and I know you followed his career very closely.
Yes, of course.
He called himself the best in the world when he was a pro wrestler. He had great confidence. He was borderline cocky. I mean, he knew he was the best and told everyone. Now he's coming across as a guy who's kind of feeling his way through. He doesn't want to say the wrong thing. He knows he's not quite the best because he isn't the best. He hasn't, you know, he hasn't sparred. He hasn't fought. You're putting him out there. You're almost exposing him when you don't even have to sell anything right now. He's not fighting next week. He's not fighting next month. So why are we doing all this media now, having him answer these questions that he doesn't know the answers to? He doesn't have a team. He doesn't have a weight class. I feel like they are now handling this wrong. Do you agree? And we're not talking about the topic of signing him.
I understand. Fair enough.
Let's just say this was a good deal.
Yeah.
You felt it. I don't understand why we're doing so much media today when he's fighting in a year.
I will say, these are good arguments. I don't deny them.
Did I throw you a curveball?
A little bit, because I was watching ESPN yesterday. I was like, all right, let me just watch him on ESPN. Listen, like I don't agree with the signing, but CM Punk seems to be quite charming. He seems to be, first of all, by fighter standards, I use the word fighter loosely in his particular case, or at least I project it on him, but quite articulate, thoughtful, had good answers, and was, to your point, I don't know anything about the pro wrestling side, but was positioning himself in a way that I found sympathetic.
Sure.
Which is, look, man, this is me on a journey. I'm not making any claims about anything. I'm just going to try. Now, I don't think the UFC should be the Make-A-Wish Foundation, but that is a sympathetic angle that I found appealing. That is a believable angle, frankly. And I don't know that's the right answer, but I can say that it makes sense to satisfy media demand to some extent, although overexposure would be a problem. I thought they came real close with Conor McGregor. But I can say if they're out there trying to assuage concerns of people like me, the ESPN interviews that he did today were pretty good at doing that. He was also great on Dan Le Batard as well. They have introduced him to people like me in a way that pro wrestling never could. Maybe there's benefit to that.
Yeah, I don't know that the argument you're making, I think would work when you're dealing with a fighter who's entering them. But I think, and this is not a knock against CM Punk. I think that, but I don't think we can treat him like a fighter. He's more of a celebrity. So they're trying to trot him out there as the way you would a celebrity. And I'm trying to think of an analogy here. And I was talking to you as we were coming in today about this. And if you ever saw the movie The Basketball Diaries,
sure.
Be like Leonardo DiCaprio. Films the Basketball Diaries. He loves basketball. After the filming is done, he decides he wants to play in the NBA. And the NBA says, "Hey, we can get Leo DiCaprio. We're going to fill every arena. We're going to get him in here, and we don't care that he can't, compete with. Forget about competing with LeBron James. He can't compete with the 12th guy in any roster."
I couldn't disagree with you more.
But he's a star. He's a big.
Okay.
Leo can dunk.
But Leo is a big star,
sure.
right? He's a big star. You bring him in there. We're going to sell tickets. CM Punk is a big star in the sports entertainment industry. So you trot him around to everybody and try to get people at least intrigued and interested. And the fact that he doesn't know who he's going to fight or what weight class is completely irrelevant, because that's only for the hardcore fans to worry about. The people who are watching, I guarantee you, the people who are up at the SI offices right now and who are watching that show don't really care about that. They just want to say, "Hey, this is an interesting guy. He's a professional wrestler. He's gonna. I've seen him on WWE stuff. He's gonna be fighting." There'll be people who don't even know the difference between whether WWE and the UFC, one's real and one's not. But just he's a celebrity, so you treat him like a celebrity. And I think I think at this point, they're doing him fine.
One second,
Chuck. I know you guys have to say.
Other than just getting the UFC out there to the masses, and maybe they say at the end of the interview, "Oh, by the way, UFC 182 is coming out." I don't see what the payoff is right now to have him do all that. Back to your point about Leo. Let's say Leo wants to play for the Knicks, right?
He could probably play.
He could.
That's besides the point. He actually could start.
The New York Knicks are only allowed to have 15 guys on their roster. So if you put Leo DiCaprio on your team, if you're the New York Knicks, you are taking away a spot from a guy who legitimately deserves to be on the team, right? You're making a big mistake by doing that because you only have 15 spots. The UFC can have 9,000 fighters on their roster next year. He's taking no one's spot. In fact, he's probably adding 2 spots to the UFC, his and the guy who he's going to fight, who, let's be honest, isn't on the roster right now, right? So whose spot is he taking? Whose pay-per-view spot is he taking? Because we can't sit here and say that in 2014 there haven't been a lot of pay-per-view fights that aren't exactly pay-per-view caliber, right? Here we are, though, talking about a guy who's going to debut on pay-per-view in probably a year that everyone will be talking about and watching and tuning in to see. So whose spot is he taking? The UFC is going to do on average 500 fights next year. And we're going to get so bent out of shape about one?
I'm not arguing that Leo DiCaprio would be wronging some lowly some 12th guy on the roster. What I'm saying though is that if he's if he's on that roster and he's elevating the profile of like some obscure team like
that
the
would
Knicks.
be bad business. You're taking away one of your 15
part
spots.
Part of these rules about limiting who can play in these leagues is to preserve quality.
Sure.
Right? UFC just doesn't have those rules. That doesn't mean they couldn't.
That's why they could do this.
But that doesn't mean they couldn't benefit from them. Like, to your point, people are like, oh, I'd rather see CM Punk than these two guys,
Tough China finalists.
I'm
right?
like, yeah, me too, but I don't want to see any of them. Like, it's not like one or the other. It's like, this tough China yoga instructor who can barely touch his toes, he also sucks at this.
Right.
I also don't want to, to me, they're two separate issues.
But now you're just completely changing the game because in 2014, these issues exist, right? The UFC wouldn't have made this signing 4 or 5 years ago. We know that.
I know, but you're saying, like, whose spot is he taking? And the answer is no one, given the current rule set. But the NBA could eliminate these rules, and they could make the same argument. The point being is the NBA matters to them that they have quality control. And so when they have quality control, then the options become real narrow. That's the issue.
But also the NBA is, and I'll get to, sorry, also the NBA is a group of 30 owners.
That's true.
No,
it's different.
It's there's
four
a lot
people. Different about it. I understand.
That's why I don't like this comparison always to like, oh, what if Jay-Z wanted to play running back for the Cowboys?
I don't like those kind of comparisons either. But what if Russell Crowe from Mr. Alaska going to play for the Florida Panthers, a place that needs the sea? No, but getting back to your original thing, I feel like now we got to circle all the way back.
Right,
but
sure.
it feels to me like he sort of is doing this sort of media corral now because he hasn't decided yet where he's going to train. There's a lot of things. We know he's been training with Hendricks Gracie. That's really the only thing that we kind of know that he does, other than the stunts and the fake wrestling and pro wrestling. Sorry, but we know he does jiu-jitsu, but he does it very spotty. And I guess it's one of those things like if he's going to do it, he should probably assuage all that stuff that's coming in right now. Go ahead and do the circuit before he does all that stuff because he doesn't know if he's going to be relocating. I guess he's basically saying that he will likely have to leave the Chicago area where he's from to go down to Florida or wherever he's going to go, Albuquerque or whichever gym he ends up in. But
unless the Bulls call him.
Yeah, so it makes some sense to me that he's kind of doing it now. I mean, he's probably. It seems like people are that intrigued. We were just at UFC 181. That sort of stole the show in some ways, and we had good fights on that card, 2 title fights. And yet he sort of stole the show, and afterwards they had an individual press conference with him before they got to the actual press conference. I mean, that's all sort of unique stuff, you know what I mean? So I feel like they're sort of just like, let's keep the poker in the fire for a little bit longer, and then before he goes and does all that stuff.
I know some MMA fans don't like Craig Carton, who did the show with in 2012. Let me just say, Craig Carton has the #2 radio show for sports in the country. Okay, #2.
What's number 1?
I think either Dan Patrick or Mike Francesa. I'm not sure. One of the two.
Gotcha.
Either way, a massive audience. Like, how often does UFC get a call from Boomer and Carton saying, "Hey, we want to have one of your fighters on"?
Sure.
Never. So why not take advantage of it while it's there? This is an audience you never reach, at least through this medium.
So now you say it's a good signing.
No, I say there's no denying that the visibility is. Who could deny the visibility?
Sure.
I mean, who could say they won't make money? That to me is not the issue. But if you're okay with that, and you got Boomer and Carton calling, pick up the phone.
But I hear people say like, oh, where do we draw the line? Is Justin Bieber next? Is Russell Crowe next?
Have you seen his Instagram boxing highlights?
I have not. But
they're terrible.
Justin Bieber isn't asking to fight in the UFC, and the thing is, like, I get if you want to begrudge the UFC for making this signing, but how can you hate on the guy who
you can't.
Who said, look, if the UFC would have said no, I would have gone somewhere else.
The UFC that's at stake more than him.
No, there's and you know me, I don't like there's no. This is America. Like, if someone wants to pay you money to go do something and you have an opportunity to go do it, dude. Go. Like, life is only as interesting as the number of times you say yes. Yeah. Like, go do it. But for me, personally, this is just my view. I have some issues with the quality control standard there and what it means, but
if he wasn't a pro wrestler, would you be more okay with it?
I would be not okay with it at all.
The reverse dice of this is that let's just say he comes in and he's really good. He surprises people and he's really good. Doesn't that sort of go the other direction of being like, well, maybe we overstock? I'm just saying
he's not going to be good.
I'm just saying. Well, Matt Mitrione, like a guy like Matt Mitrione who had no fights, but he did come up through the tough. He had to fight a couple of exhibitions, I guess, through that. Sure. But he was a pro football. I don't really think he had any formal martial arts training other than like some karate as a kid, things like that. So, it's not a direct comparison. But he was 31 years old when he started his climb, and he's still in there. He's still, doing okay for himself. I don't know. It's one of those things. You're not sure unless you really see him do something. Right now, we can speculate. Well, he doesn't have any talent. We've never seen it. We've never heard anybody talking about him that way. So I feel like it's just a big gray area. But ultimately, if he falls on his face it looks worse. It's like the James Toney thing or something. It's like it looks worse for the UFC than it will for him.
I think a lot of, and by the way, James Toney didn't train for all that long. This is a guy who's saying, I am only going to get in there once I feel ready. And look, I know him to a degree, a very prideful person. He's not going to go out there and try to embarrass himself. Thing that I just feel like a lot of people are against this because it's pro wrestling. And in MMA, we feel a little weird about the pro wrestling thing.
People are like, oh, Matt Mitchell, maybe Mitchell too, but like I think Matt Riddle was 0-0.
Sure.
I am not okay with this. I am 100% not okay with this. But the point to me is, I know people always think, oh, Luke Thomas bashes the UFC, and maybe I do sometimes, because it's the most special thing we have in the sport. It is the best organization by far. They have the best resources to do the best MMA consistently, and when they fall short of that, I don't like it. But to quickly make my point, with CM Punk or anybody 0-0, you should not even be allowed to sniff a UFC locker room if I had my way. You reserve that for UFC can put on shows consistently over a calendar year that no other organization can touch.
Yeah.
That, to me, deserves to be treated in a special way.
I couldn't agree more. I do feel like times have changed a little bit. You know, you see how this year went, so they need to do certain things to try to get back on track. But more to my wrestling point, like, no one called him Kevin Ferguson, right? No one called him Kevin Ferguson. Everyone called him. Everyone
Josh
called him
Gross did, consistently.
Kimbo Slice. I'll go back and look. Maybe that's one guy. Everyone calling him Phil Brooks. That's because I don't want to be a part of this whole wrestling thing.
I go back and forth.
Oh, I'm not saying you in particular. I'm just saying, like, I see it on all the lower thirds. Phil Brooks. I never heard anyone call.
I would defer to whatever he wants to be called.
The guy's been known as CM Punk longer than he's been known as Phil Brooks. Now, okay, we're nitpicking here, but I feel like some of it is just it's so funny because it's like this has been the one topic that has always made MMA fans feel so uncomfortable: the marriage between MMA and pro wrestling. And now it's smacked down. It's not Brock Lesnar because you could get away with Brock Lesnar, All American, all that stuff. But now it's like, gosh, this is like a slap in the face to all those purists. And I kind of take some joy in that. Even though I've become like Mr. Pro Wrestling, God is my witness. I have not watched a single minute of Monday Night Raw for years. I don't watch it. I never watch any of it. I know who he is, but I have nothing to do with it. Go ahead.
I just was going to say, I'm not quite in the same place as you are as far as this guy does not, or nobody who in his place deserves to be anywhere near the octagon. For me, it's all about the matchmaking. And you know, I take a lot more umbrage at title fights that should not be title fights. You know, Chael Sonnen, a very, very good, successful mixed martial artist who had, almost beaten Anderson Silva. So he's a very high-level middleweight in the UFC. He had no right being in the cage with John Jones with a title on the line when he hadn't fought in that division in 7 years and was coming off a knockout loss. I had a big problem with that. This, I have no problem. I don't have a big problem with this. I mean, I see the folly of it, but I don't take umbrage against it, particularly unless they decide they are going to, just because they want to bring put a big spotlight on and put him in a high-profile fight against somebody. If they were to do that,
stretch, Chael Sonnen, Miesha Tate, Frankie Edgar, Nick Diaz, all coming off losses, all got title shots. That doesn't bother you as the creme de la creme? That doesn't mean more to you about the state of the sport when people who are coming off losses, and now you got Roy McDonald who's done everything.
It is bothersome. It is not equally bothersome.
Yeah,
I mean, people are like, oh, what level of belt is CM Punk? So how long has he trained? Right, 4 years is what I've been told. Okay, 2.5, a little more consistently. That means
Tanner told me 2, so I'm going to go with this.
2. Okay, so let's go with 2. That means if you're, I know guys, good athletes, Division I athletes. This is a true story that have been on the mat for 2 years. They're okay blue belts. And that's 3-4 times a week. Mm-hmm. If you're training intermittently, you are probably not even a blue, much less a purple. Like, jiu-jitsu's hard. MMA is hard to do. It is hard to get good at. So to your point, it is not okay with me that these guys coming off a loss again. This is, if someone's filling in for an injury, okay, whatever.
Yep.
But to me, we use the word celebrity. Well, what are we celebrating? You're celebrating someone's, not in CM Punk's case, because he has a different craft, the pro wrestling craft, but in my case, you're celebrating achievement. You are celebrating people who have done decorated things and have worked and have toiled and have suffered. So if Frankie Edgar gets a shot where he doesn't deserve it, that's not okay. But Frankie Edgar has abilities that 5 guys in the world have. I will let some S slide with Frankie Edgar.
Okay.
I will say, though,
last point.
the gyms are sort of falling over themselves to sort of bring CM Punk into them.
That's
I
true.
mean, regardless of how you want to look at does he belong there, there's a lot of people who would like to be associated with him.
Yeah, and some big name fighters as well. Now, you don't know about their motives, but I do feel like at least some of them are sincere. Okay, we need to put a bow on 2014. Before we do that, well, kind of in our way of wrapping this whole thing up, the UFC is kicking off 2015 in a big way. It's kind of like their Daytona 500, right? I mean, what better fight to kick off the year than Jones-Cormier? We've been waiting for this for a long time. I just want to quickly touch on that promo that you were talking about earlier. Do you feel like the UFC kind of did John Jones dirty with that? I mean, was that not cool?
Well, the UFC, I think it was one of the greatest UFC promos
Couldn't
ever.
agree more.
I think it was a tremendous promo for the UFC to sell fights. I think that, I don't know whether doing him dirty, that might be a bit of an exaggeration because he said everything in there. They didn't take things out of context. I mean, they took things out of context. They did not run the entire tape, but they didn't take anything out of context in an unfair way. I think the promo gets across exactly the tenor of the interaction between Jones and Cormier. So I think it was a very fair thing. I think that Jones, I think that he has good reason to be upset about it because he probably feels that he should be more protected. But I think that was a great promo, and I'm really glad they did it this way.
What do you think?
It's funny, this lawsuit we started with, you're talking about the likeness and how they want to use it, however they want to use it. You'd think there would be some consultation at least on something like this because obviously they're using some of the leaked footage and they're using, they're sort of melding the whole thing together, making John Jones look like two people, and to me, I could see why he would be upset, but at the same time, since it's already sort of out there, and that's really what has brought us all to this buzz place of like, oh my God, I can't wait for this fight. In some ways, it's just bringing the fire back, just relighting it, saying like, hey, remember this? Because remember at the time, we're like, I hope this didn't play out too soon. I feel like this sort of kind of got that thing going again. I have no problem with it, but I can totally see why John Jones would have a problem with it.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, you can see why Jones would be like, but from my vantage point, people were like, "Oh, Mr. Purist, how come it's all this rabble rousing? That the whole thing is rabble rousing."
There's no fight footage in it.
None. There's
It's amazing.
And my argument was that is the deft move of all of them because strip away all the animosity. This is the best that MMA has to offer, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, more or less. This is arguably, we'll see how it goes, but on paper, this might be the best fight they've ever put on ever. Like that's not. That may be, we want to slowly approach that, but that's not a crazy thing to say. When you add in all this other calamitous, Tasmanian devil nonsense, you don't have to worry about the credentials. Just sell it on this. The credentials will take care of itself. So to me, it was a genius stroke, but I can see why Jones is doing the facepalm here a little bit.
All of it's a little bit tame if they were to keep the cameras rolling after this show.
To me, it's just funny that remember when Steve Cofield asked Dana White about why is Frank Mir saying he wanted to kill Brock Lesnar a bad thing. Right. It's a different time in the sport. People are kind of like over it now.
Yeah.
But that had severe consequences. Frank Mir lost his WEC job, I remember, and Dana White was not too pleased with old Steve. I mean, who likes Steve anyway?
Sure.
But it's just funny that now they were using it in the promo.
Well, as I was saying, the times have changed, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
CM Punk as well. All right, so let's talk about 2014. We're here to put this past year to bed, and it hasn't been the best year. Well, it hasn't been the best year for the UFC. And look, they expanded their schedule, so things got a little stretched. And then when you add to the concoction of the expanded schedule to all these drug test failures, injuries, fight cancellations, all kinds of craziness, people running away from drug tests. I mean, a lot of crap happened this year, and not all of it was good. There were some great fights, but 2013 was maybe the greatest year in the history of the sport. 2014 wasn't. What's your story of 2014? When you put this year to bed, what's the story that sticks out?
Well, it's tough to say, but if I could just sort of encapsulate it and synthesize it, I would just say this was a test of the Zuffa machine. We often spoke about how well in the years leading up to 2014, about the Zuffa machine and their ability to do PR and whip up fan interest and convert things quickly and get it to market and all these different sort of various things they're able to do. That was just, it was so nimble and it was so effective. And those things are still, I think, very, very true. I mean, if the Zuffa machine can't do it in combat sports, who can? I don't know. Nobody was the answer to that. Not even Mayweather and all his millions. But I think it got tested this year. With the injuries, it got tested. And they budgeting for it. With the expanded schedule, it got tested. with disgruntled fighters. It got tested. And in many ways, it answered the challenge. In some ways, we don't know what's going to happen. In other ways, it got a little bit, dinged up, as the Bloomberg report noted, in the loss of profit. So to me, it was both a test of some of the weaknesses that they have and also some of the resiliency in the machine. But the question is, for me, as we pivot to 2015, what will ultimately be the story of how the Zuffa machine recovered and then maybe, either floundered or rose to new heights?
Well, I think, Luke encapsulates it really well. I think that part of that, a year ago when we were sitting here, and I took a lot of grief from you guys about saying that the big story was going to be the PEDs.
You were right for like 6 months.
Right. Yeah. It was kind of the story of but I don't feel like it ended up. It sort of happened so soon after we talked about it that it was really the first 6 months, and then it's pretty much been out of the it's been gone a little bit, and maybe that part in a way is a story that the idea that fighters are going to fail drug tests is going to, and the testing is going to be enhanced, is going to be the kind of thing that we're not going to think about. It's going to almost be second nature. So I guess I would look at the year and say that between fight results going to the wayside because of failed drug tests and between injuries scuttling fights before they happen, I guess that really would be a lot of false promises, a lot of things that we thought were going to happen that either didn't happen or they did happen, but later we were told that didn't really happen because somebody was not real.
The death of the Dana Scrum. It's like, for years.
It's not a small deal.
I know it's not. No, in some ways
are upset.
But that might be a culmination of all the things that you guys are talking about. Because to me, it was a very hard year for the UFC, just from the standpoint of UFC 176. We barely even, wept over that one because we'd already seen it with UFC 151. It just sort of went away. Things like that. But I have to agree with you guys about the drugs thing. I felt, the TRT ban, just the things that came down like that, the out of competition drug tests that they're going to bring, that became a topic. The streaming of the Nevada Athletic Commission's, hearings. All of a sudden, we've got the best internet show going. You know what I mean? Like all these things. It's a very new sort of culture, or an enhanced sort of culture that I think for so long we'd sort of happily skipped. You know what I mean? Like the scrutiny really got bigger. Like you said, the Zuffa machine had to keep moving through it, and to me, that's really the story. It was just all that adversity they faced, all the the fight cancellations, the drug busts, the TRT ban, all the stuff that came out of it, and Chael's son, and all that stuff. So to me, it's just going to go down as one of those wounded years, sort of like 2012, but maybe worse than that because of all the negative publicity that came with it.
But you look at 2012, there were some big fights that happened that year, and this year was not quite the same. I like how 2015 and what the story will be, or hopefully will be in 2015, is very much related to 2014, because it feels like in classic Zuffa fashion, they're giving an FU to 2014 by starting the first 2 months of the year, or at least hoping to start the first 2 months of the year, in the most amazing way possible. You look at those 4 events in January, and then you've got
That's the best. Sorry, I'm spinning like a million miles. That's the best month in the history of the sport, right?
History?
If you had to pick if all the fights happen, or cancellation, is this January from whatever is scheduled, just in terms of like the depth and the tiering of the cards, what month is better than that?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there are 4 events. I love the start and finish of it.
Yep.
Diaz, Silva, and of course Jones, Cormier at the beginning. But it's great that they're doing that to try to move past 2014. So that really is, and I agree with all of you, what you said, I don't have to repeat it. That really is the story to watch in 2015, because it's all laid out for them. The guys are coming back. Silva's coming back. We expect GSP to come back. Punk, whether you love it or not, will gain a lot of attention for them. He's probably going to debut. And then you have, the rise of Conor McGregor and all these other stories. It's all laid out for them in 2015 to rebound in the biggest way possible. They have the chips to rebound, but how much damage did 2014 do to them? From a popularity standpoint, from a business standpoint, can they rebound? And will the fights actually come to fruition? Will those fights actually happen? Because I feel like the biggest thing about 2014 was the fans don't believe these fights are going to happen. Like they're waiting to the last minute to buy these tickets, and that's something that you have to sort of regain their trust.
Yet, right?
Yeah. I mean,
proof.
That might be an indication of where Vegas is at these days as well.
Sure, of course.
So who knows by the time January 3rd. It's a great time to do it because in the past they would do those New Year's Eve cards, if you want to call it that, on like December 27, 28, and I feel like people were kind of leaving or maybe not quite in Vegas yet. Well, now December 31st is a Wednesday, so if you come to spend New Year's in Vegas, just stick around for the next 2 days and you're off. So I think this is good that they're starting this way, although they are going up against the NFL playoffs the first weekend, so we'll see how that affects it. All that being said, what do you guys want to say about 2015? What are you most looking forward to? What is the story to watch come next year?
I just want to see big stars. That's it. That's my only request. I just want to see big stars and the biggest fights they can make. And without quibbling with the too many other details, let's just see the biggest prizes you have paraded in front of us.
Yeah, that's what I want to see. I'm thinking one of the things, though, that might happen this year, this coming year, might be a little bit more of that NFL-style parity. We just saw the welterweight title trade hands. Now, Robbie Lawler might hold that belt for quite a while, or he might be just a transition to the next guy coming along. Dillashaw dethrones a guy who hadn't lost in forever, and now TJ's defended once, but supposedly his next fight is going to be against Dominic Cruz.
Great.
And when that fight happens, well, I'm picking Dominic Cruz to win that fight. That might be right there, two champions who go down. I sort of feel like everybody is kind of vulnerable, other than maybe Ronda Rousey. I mean, I feel like John Jones, of course, is number one pound for pound, and he might lose to Cormier. And if he doesn't lose, maybe he goes right up to heavyweight right then, and the belt goes vacant. Who knows? I mean, you could make an argument for just about every belt being kind of iffy as far as we've had so many dominant champions in the past. It feels as though there's a little more transition now, and I wouldn't be surprised if if turmoil of a different sort happens this year in terms of the brass and leather being traded hands.
Maybe I'm just being optimistic because of where we just came from with 2014, but events. I would just think that, like, especially like you were mentioning with the stars and getting the stars to face one another, getting the people to fight, making events again like we had. I feel like that's something that's sort of left the game a little bit. We haven't got the exact fights we want to get. Jones Cormier is the perfect way to kick it off, because I feel like that's the most, that fight throughout this whole year would have probably been the biggest you could put together. So I feel like just that sort of thing, just getting the biggest stars together, optimistically bringing back the icon to some of these guys, and when those icons fight, making an event.
Real quick, one silver lining for 2014 was the year of the comeback. Kat Zingano came back. Dominic Cruz came back. Todd Duffy came back. You can go down the list. Yeah, right. Well, in a way, he came back.
He lost, but hey.
There's lots of guys who finally got out there, and some win, some lost. But for Dominic Cruz to be gone as long as he did, and for Zingano to suffer the nightmare that she had, to me, there was a little bit of a bright light that was constantly shining through, that guys who had it real bad finally had a chance to make it real good.
So let's end on this. And I'm putting you on the spot, but I want to end on a positive note.
All right.
All right, I'm putting you guys on the spot here. Did not ask you about this beforehand. What's the moment that sticks out, your favorite moment of the year? The moment that made you say, you know what, I freaking love this sport. Amidst all the negativity, all the BS, all the arguing, all that, the constant, week-to-week struggle of covering event, all that stuff. What was the moment that made you remember, you know what, I love this?
Dominic Cruz. And I don't even know why. As journalists, we don't go to events or watch events with a rooting interest. So I wasn't rooting for him to win that comeback fight, but I was definitely rooting for him to walk out. I mean, I was so much wanting to not hear the news that he was injured again in the weeks preceding that fight. And when he came roaring out there, I mean, I was sort of getting chills just watching him come roaring out to the octagon, and then I said, okay, let's just see what he does. How much is left for this guy? Is this guy still the fighter he was 3 years ago? And then we saw that absolute destruction. That was a moment that I thought was that was the moment for me.
Matt Brown.
The rise. Matt
Brown. I'm serious. Like the Matt Brown Eric Silva fight to me was like one of those moments where you're watching it, and you sort of see the tide turn. And you're like, it's playing out. This thing is just shifting, and everybody just gets so involved in it. It's just, to me, that moment when he just sort of came to life in that fight and took it from him, that really stands out. I'm always on about Matt Brown, but it's sort of taken on like a jokey atmosphere. But that fight really encapsulated to me why he is Matt Brown. That's the guy that he is. I would say that a close second, though, and maybe we wanted to talk about this, but the Conor McGregor thing in Ireland to me is still, you see stuff like that and you realize there's a country like Ireland is so behind their star, and you see it 100%. And all of their fighters, and just that sort of atmosphere. I wasn't there. I know you were there that night, and it probably stands out to you as one of the great events. But to me, that when you see something like that, it brings it all home. Like, wow, this thing really connect. Fight game can really connect. Not the people to their to their countries and et cetera. So it's like that was a fun one too.
If I'm being honest, my favorite combat sports moment was Kyle Dake winning his 4th title, NCAA. I thought that was just, I was blown away. But in terms of MMA, no one's going to believe me because of the recency effect. But I thought Anthony Pettis' submission of Gilbert Melendez was like you're going to ask me everyone will have a different answer. Why do you watch MMA? That is why I watch MMA, because he is incredible. He has talent that I cannot even articulate in the language I have been speaking for 35 years, and that takes my breath away.
Wow. You nailed mine with Ireland, because it just reminded me about how important this stuff is to people and how they can get behind someone, and just everything that happened, not even with Conor, but everyone leading up to Conor on that night was just something I'll never forget. Just a few more to throw out. Josh Saman, his return, everything he's been through.
Another underdog story.
Yes.
Or comeback, I should say.
Comeback, yes. And one that is kind of obscure, but really stuck with me. Being in attendance in Newark, Super Bowl weekend, Uriah Faber loses controversially, right? I mean, a lot of people thought he shouldn't have lost that fight. When he did, it was somewhat controversial. He put up the thumbs up. But the way he handled that, with so much class, didn't complain, didn't throw Herb Dean under the bus. And if you recall, at the end of the interview, the post-fight interview with Joe Rogan, he said, "Everyone, watch out for my guy, TJ Dillashaw." In that moment, he had lost another title fight, but he was still putting his friend and teammate over. He was still telling everyone, look out, he's coming next. And he was right. I just love that. Everyone always asks me, why do you love covering this sport? It's because of the fighters, because of how open and honest and sincere they are. They're unlike any other pro athlete, in my opinion, and Faber really captured that in that post-fight interview. So it wasn't the best year ever for mixed martial arts, but certainly a lot of memorable things happened, and we really appreciate you tuning in each and every week, or whenever we do the show, to get our thoughts, and we promise next year we will be better, and we will try to do the show a little more frequently.
We couldn't be worse.
Yes. Although that being said, we are off for the next few weeks due to the holidays and whatnot. But we will be back better than ever next year. We promise you that. We hope you enjoyed the show this week and all year long. Thank you so much for your involvement, watching it live, after the fact, and of course, those pesky commenters down below, always weighing in and wondering if we are reading your comments. Yes, we are. Some of us.
I'm just deleting them. No, I'm kidding.
So that is it for Luke, Jeff, Chuck. I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the fights. Happy New Year, and of course, happy holidays.